You're muted. Auntie Patty, you're muted.
Oh, good morning. Welcome to our session, Roads Less Taken, with our featured speaker, Emiko Susilo, actually Emiko Saraswati Susilo, and who is a cultural consultant for Disney's animated film, Raya and the Last Dragon. Today's talk is being actually hosted by the Asian Studies Department, Academy of Creative Media, and the Center for Southeast Asian Studies. My name is Patty Dunn, and I'm the academic advisor for Asian Studies, and our majors are actually encouraged to study Asia interdisciplinary. So they have a fuller understanding of Asia. Emiko herself got her master's degree at the University of Hawaii in Asian Studies, yay. But her roots actually go much deeper with our UH family. She is the daughter of the late Harja Susilo, who is a longtime instructor of the Javanese gamelan and artistic director. Emiko herself is an accomplished Balinese dancer and musician, and a key member of Sudamani, a Balinese ensemble that's based in Bali. But she's also a talented Javanese dancer and musician, and has performed with the University of Hawaii Gamelan on several occasions. And I just want to say that today we have a guest, Matt Dunn, who, because he wants to hear his Auntie Miko, he's actually a game designer with Riot Games. And later on the semester, we will feature him in one of our Roads Less Taken talks. Thank you, Kathy Clayton, the chair of Asian Studies, who's sitting in on this session also. And I especially want to thank Professor Margulis for letting us invade her ACM 420 class. Thank you very, very much. And just to let you know how small this world is, Professor Margulis told me that she once worked with Emiko's mother, Judy Mitoma, who is also one of my teachers. And so we've come back full circle. So I'll hand it over to Laura and Emiko.
Okay, we are so happy. I'm sorry I'm behind the computer. I'm letting people in here. So you're facing my class. This is ACM 420, where the advanced animation students are making a film. They're working in the style of a studio, and they're making a film in one semester. So they are very, we are all very interested in hearing about all of your experiences, Emiko, and we're so excited that you're here with us. So please tell us some of your give us some of your knowledge and experiences. We're dying to hear about it, and we all really like the movie Raya and the Last Dragon too, so we have lots of questions.
Oh, thank you so much. It is really such an honor and such a pleasure to be here. I wish that I could be with you all in Honolulu, but thank goodness for Zoom, because I feel so connected to everyone, and it's really nice to be back home at UH with you all right now. This is really very special to be working with Auntie Patty and to be with you also, Laura. It's amazing. And my good friend Kia Kato, who's been my friend since we were 8 years old. We got into a lot of trouble. She's also visiting us today. Thank you, Kia. And Steve Arunsak, who is a professor at Cal State Stanislaus. Hi, Steve, was also in the Cultural Trust, everybody. So you need to ask Steve Arunsak questions later also. I'm so glad that you're here, Steve. He's the boss. So I just thought today maybe I would share just a little bit of my background and then talk about Raya itself, kind of describe what we were doing and talk about different aspects of that experience, talk a little bit about how I actually got connected to the project, because it was unexpected for me. And also a couple of just little takeaways, things that I learned in the process that I find are useful to me even now, several years later. So I'll just start by telling you a little bit about myself. Thank you for that amazing introduction, Auntie Patty. I was born in the Kaiser, Waikiki, and I always feel so at home when I can go back to Honolulu. I used to sleep in the gamelan room in the music department. So that room is very special place for me. So if any of you have not taken gamelan, I really highly suggest you go. It's not just a music class. It's really like connects you to something very powerful, a very long history of music and family and culture that the University of Hawaii has that's very rare and is not really available in other universities. So it's very, very special. My mom and my dad were both there when I was born, but very soon after I was born, I always call myself the straw that broke the camel's back, because soon after I was born, my parents got divorced. So my brother and my mom and I moved back to California, and my dad stayed in Hawaii, of course, in the music and at the musicology department. But I was then raised in California. I went to school here in Los Angeles through high school, and then I went to UC Berkeley. And I actually went to UC Berkeley because they taught Bahasa Indonesia, which was very rare at that time, way back in the Ice Age. It's much more common now, but at that time there were not that many choices, and that was very important to me. So I went there also because they had a Javanese gamelan, and because Gamelan Sekardaya, which is a very important community gamelan here that is in the Bay Area, was also close to UC Berkeley. So they also had a great anthropology department, but really I was making decisions based on things like what language I could learn, because I really wanted to learn more Bahasa Indonesia and to be able to study gamelan. After I finished UC Berkeley, I went on a program called the Dharma Siswa, and I spent a year and a half actually in Indonesia. And I should say that, my education, as I think of it, is both formal and informal. And so in addition to my school stuff, along the way, my parents took me back to Jogja and also to Bali. And that was very important for me to remain connected to kind of my roots, I guess, not just language, not just culture, but that like sense of feeling connected to something was very important for me. And it made me really an oddball, which was interesting because it was that quality of spending time in Indonesia that made me very weird. Like I would suddenly burst into Bahasa Indonesia when I got really mad at somebody on the basketball court. And like I got sent, the only time I ever got sent to the principal's office was because I got in a fight because someone had touched my head, and I was so deeply offended. I thought it was appropriate to like scratch their arm bloody, because that was such an offensive thing to do for an Indonesian. And the principal was like, what was the problem? And so there were many things that I was raised with that I felt viscerally in my body that a lot of American kids were just like, what is the big deal? What is that thing? Where is Indonesia? So that was kind of a frustrating thing growing up, because people really had no idea what Indonesia was, like no idea at all. And growing up, that was kind of an annoying and disempowering, although I don't like to use that word too much. So that's one of the reasons why when Raya came along, it was really special for me, because I had spent so many years trying to explain to people not just where Indonesia was, but what it was, because people had no idea what Indonesia was. They didn't even know it was a country. So anyway, that's kind of and that's kind of how I grew up. When I went on this Dharma Siswa program, I spent a year and a half in Bali studying music and studying dance and studying singing and learning Balinese language as well. And after I came back from that, I'll just say I had tremendous culture shock, because I had been studying with a Javanese teacher there who lived very simply. He and his 2 children and his wife lived in one room. and they shared the bathroom with 7 other families. They shared the kitchen with 7 other families. They had one big bed, and then they had another bed they would roll out at night. And we would sit there and sing all day long, and they would, we would eat like fried tofu. They were incredibly generous, incredibly kind, and just such a very simple way of living. And I came back from that, and I felt very like taken care of and very nurtured and protected by this family in this one room. And I came back, and it was like Black Friday or something. And it was so shocking to come back from Indonesia and like walk into the middle of the Christmas shopping season. It was truly, it was very, very weird. And I really was like, I don't think I want to be here. This is too much like capitalism and consumerism. So that was an important perspective for me to have on kind of the culture of the United States and some of our assumptions about what's important and what our priorities are and what is needed to have a good life. So a lot of things I learned by just not being in this country, and by being with people who are masters, who live very simply, but who really are masters of their craft. After I came back from Indonesia, I was still in a state of culture shock. Enter Uncle Rick Tremelios, who is like the knight in shining armor for so many people. He saw that I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And he kind of whispered to me, he's like, hey, why didn't you like come to the Asian Studies program at UH? I was like, what's Asian Studies? And why would I want a master's degree? He's like, just trust me. It's a good program. It's interdisciplinary. You can study with your dad. You can put together your own program. And I was like, well, that sounds kind of cool. And it was a really beautiful program for me because I was able to study with my dad. It was really the only time I was able to study with my dad, and the only time I really lived with my dad, actually, except for when I was less than 1 year old. And I also studied with Auntie Patty and danced and sang with Auntie Patty, which was great. So it was very powerful to go back to that gamelan room as an adult and spend time there. And I was actually also teaching Balinese dance at that time. But I have to say, the Asian Studies program was very important for me because I would say, there are maybe, if I had to like come up with just a few things, working with my father was a life-changing experience for me. He is a tremendous teacher. I learned so much from him with regard to what it means to be a good teacher. He would teach me like a gander pattern on an instrument, and he'd sit all the way across the room. He would come show it to me. Then he'd walk away like 15 feet away and like bring out the newspaper and like lean back and read the newspaper. And he would just let me like try to figure it out. And I'd kind of get through it. And then I'd go to a spot, I get stuck, and I try it again, I'd get stuck. I try it again, I'd get stuck. And from across the room, very quietly and gently, he would just sing the part to me. I'd go, oh yeah. And then I would get through it. And from that, I really learned a lot about being a great teacher, about giving students a chunk of responsibility that is challenging but manageable, and then letting people struggle through it and work through it. And then when people are really, really struggling, help them just a little bit, and then let them continue to work on it. And that is one of the philosophies of teaching that I really think is one of the greatest lessons I ever learned from my dad. And I also got to study with the amazing other professors. Bapak Michael Ong Thwin was a professor of mine at that time, and I'm very, very grateful to have had that time with him. And both of the doctors Andaya were also my teachers. And I have to say, Pak Michael Ong Thwin taught me the importance of history, which has also changed the way I see the world. And wherever he is now, I apologize for saying this, but prior to being at UH, I thought history was the most boring, terrible subject to ever have to study. I hated history. I'll just say it like that. But I remember walking into his class, and the first day I was riveted, and the sense of urgency he had about us all understanding our history, understanding how it's connected to what's happening today, and why it's important to understand it, to see the patterns of what's happening in the world today through our history was it was like completely mind-blowing to me to think of history as something that's relevant to our lives today. And all of that is important because that then comes into play when I started like thinking about Raya, because when Disney came to me to ask about being a cultural consultant, honestly, if I hadn't had the background of the kind of intellectual rigor and the breadth of knowledge that I got at UH, I really don't think I would have been able to do the job I was able to do. And I don't think I would have had even the confidence to accept the offer of being one of the consultants along with Bapa Steve Arunsak. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit about, you know, my background. I want to just share a little clip of maybe my life in Bali a little bit. I'll just share a little bit with you. Oops, I hope I shared the sound. Let's see. Can you see this clip? Let me see if you can hear it. Can you hear that? So this is my daughter in the front right, on our right. And these are my students. And this is my house, actually. This is our house in Bali. I'm going to try to skip ahead. So this is Ibu Arini in front, and that's me in back. But
Would
oh
more
my gosh,
effective
here's
writing
an ad
give you an edge at
for
work?
Grammarly.com.
Grammarly can make your
in case
job
any of
one
you
click
don't know how to
simpler.
write. But Bu Arini is one of the great masters of Balinese dance. And often people think Balinese dance is like so much more active and dynamic than Javanese dance, but honestly, this is a very quiet section, and there's a lot of Javanese dance that's much more like rhythmic and dynamic than some of these sections. It's kind of why I wanted to show you this. I'll just show you one more little clip with my daughter. This is me with my baby girl. And that's my husband in back. That dude smiling, no shirt on. Why don't we wear? Okay, that's my husband. There's like a differentiation in movement, which I wanted you to notice because it becomes relevant later with Raya. These are the kinds of things they want. How one dancer is lower than the other dancer. One dancer is in front. See how she's down low? Those were the kinds of things we talked about with the animators in Raya. And the kind of quickness of this movement versus the slowness of what you saw earlier, the refinement of character or the strength of character, like preparing for battle. So this kind of use of dynamic tempo, movement, facial expression in dance were the kinds of things that I had the opportunity to talk to the creators of Raya about. Okay, I'm just going to stop there. So that is yes, in part because I just want to see my daughter because she just went to Bali. But I did talk a lot about about movement and dance with the whole animation team at Raya, which was really exciting. So are there any questions? I was going to start talking about the actual Raya project right now, unless there are any questions at this moment. Anything? People can just pop in and say something. We will also have a big chunk of time at the end for questions. Okay, I'm gonna jump into Raya because I know people want. Oh yeah.
So in Raya, there's not like a lot of dance, right? But
No.
how did what you could bring to the movie apply? Like, how did they use your special knowledge in terms of the character's movement?
So I sent a lot of videos of different kinds of characters. So I sent a video of like refined female character, of like a refined, what we would call a banchihan character, a character that has both masculine as well as feminine aspects to who they are. And then I would send video of a really strong character. We also did this live in studio and in Burbank too. And so I talked to them about how dancers in Bali and in Java use the body to create like bigness or strength. Like Matt is really good at this, like creating like really strong square character. And how movement when you're fighting, right? The fight scene in Raya, I love. And like, if you like see this, like this one shot where Namraya goes, ah, and like, I don't want to like say that I'm personally able to take credit for that, but I did send a video of them, me going like, oh, like that. Because I wanted to talk about how facial expression is used in Balinese dance, especially, and how the body is used in Javanese dance to create like bigger space, sharpness of movement, or like just the elevation of the arms and the legs, and how those kinds of things in dance convey cultural values. So, for example, if you were wanting to be very respectful of someone, you would lower your body. Like the character you saw, like Ayu was dancing with me. She was down, bouncing around on the ground because that character was the servant to my character, right? So if you're the servant character, oh, thank you, Steve. If you're the servant character, that's how you need to position your body. And one of the things I loved about Raya that I was really hoping would happen was that a lot of the body language of the characters for me felt very natural and realistic to a Southeast Asian person. Steve, you might have something to say about that too, so please pop in if you do. But anyway, that's how we worked with dance. So it was facial expression, use of elevation, how quickly or slowly, sharply or smoothly people were moving in space, and how in dance and also in just cultural values in Indonesia, those things reflect how refined someone is and what your relationship is to another person without having to say anything. And it would have been very jarring for me if, like in Raya, for example, Raya had ever like reached up and touched her dad's head. Like I just would have been like, I can't be part of this project. I would have like dropped out of the project because there are just certain things you don't do. And you can see all of that in dance, but we talked a lot with the team about that too directly. Does that kind of answer your?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
The characters are so believable and realistic. And I think that all of your attention to, body language and movement is really an integral part of their characters.
It's very cool. And Steve wrote this funny comment about the shoes. It's actually true. Steve, everybody on the team must have heard about this because this was probably a very expensive and time-consuming thing. But in the opening scene, like within the first 3 minutes, and they were showing us these clips, there's a scene and Raya takes off her shoes. And I was like, that's great. She's taking off her shoes. Thank you. But the way she took off her shoes is not really respectful and wouldn't be appropriate in a temple environment. And they were like, oh, how would you take off your shoes? And I think maybe the original footage, Steve, I don't know if this is true, but I think the original footage, she had like used her hands and like kind of threw them or something like that. And I was like, no, like my kids would get in so much trouble if they did that in a temple and just like threw their shoes on the ground. And plus you wouldn't be touching your shoes with your hands if you're going to then touch a sacred object. Like that wouldn't really make sense. So they had to go back Well, they didn't have to, but they chose to, and I appreciated this. They went back and we did multiple videos of us taking off our shoes. Like, how do you take your shoes off respectfully? If you're in a hurry, what do you do if you're going in a temple? And we sent them to the animators and they actually went and reanimated that scene. I did. I probably caused the production a lot of money.
We
Steve,
actually noticed that.
This is such a
Noticed
clown.
that scene, so,
Did you notice that scene?
yeah, we noticed it.
They spent a lot of time and care and resources on that particular moment. I think because it was one of the opening moments, they wanted to make sure that it would resonate with people on a very visceral, like subconscious level, which for me, it felt very appropriate.
Cool.
And yeah. And Steve will continue to give funny comments. That was his primary role on the team, was to be the class clown. So in addition to providing a lot of amazing information about Laos. So I thought I would just tell you how I got connected to the project, because I think a lot of times we wonder, like, how do people even get involved in a Disney project? Like, that just seems impossible. And I will say that I did not apply for anything. I basically just did what I normally do. I was teaching dance, teaching cultural awareness and things like that. And one of my dance students who had come to Bali was a consultant for wardrobe on Moana. So she knew Osnat Shurer, who was also the producer of Raya. And so when Osnat asked Rika for her, recommendations for a cultural consultant from Indonesia, Rika was kind enough to suggest that I come on the team. And then I asked that they also bring Pak Dewa Brata, my husband, on the team, because Pak Dewa was like Balinese, born, raised in Bali. So both of us came onto the project through Rika. So, I think it's an interesting lesson on how we have these parts of ourselves that sometimes we think are not connected to this other path. Like I, was beginning to do voice acting. This was a long time ago, but I was beginning to do voice acting and really interested in that. But I became connected with Disney because of my work in Balinese dance. So, I guess that's just to say, I don't think we should ever let go of the roots of who we are, where we come from, the things that we love and that are important to us. I don't think we ever need to feel like we have to let go of those things, and they might well end up guiding us in the direction that we really, want to go. They might end up connecting us to things that we had no idea they would be able to connect us to. So the connection to Raya came through a Balinese dance student, which was really pretty, fortunate. I feel very blessed that that's how it all happened. I wonder if I should show the trailer of Raya. Would that be a good thing? Because maybe everybody saw it, but maybe everybody didn't see. Okay, here it is. Hopefully, again, I'm doing this right. Let's see.
All right, guys, remember what we're looking for, and don't trust anyone.
Whoa, what?
Hey, baby, where are your parents? Hey, who's baby? What? Really? A con baby? Impressive. We could use someone like you. Let's catch you up. My name is Raya. Our lands have been at war for as long as we can remember. Our people never see eye to eye.
My daughter, I believe our people can come together again. But someone has to take the first step.
Now, in order to restore peace, we must find the last dragon.
I wish to join this fellowship of butt kickery.
Let's go. We'll have to watch our backs. We're not the only ones looking. 6 years of searching. Please let this be it. Oh, mighty Sisu!
Who said that?
We really need your help.
I'm gonna be real with you. I'm not like the best dragon. Have you ever done like a group project, but there's like that one kid who didn't pitch in as much, but still ended up with the same grade?
We're doomed.
You and the dragon are coming with me.
My sword here says we're not. The world's broken. You can't trust anyone.
Maybe it's broken because you don't trust anyone. You just have to take the first step. I just shape changed.
Dragons can do that?
Look how close my butt is to my head. It's gonna make digestion so much faster.
In theaters or ordered on Disney Plus with Premier Access, March 5th.
I think Aquafina is such a brilliant performer. She's amazing. But as I was watching that, oops, hold on, we need to stop that. But as I was watching that, I was thinking again about how movement was being used even in those fight scenes. Like if you look at just some of the body stance that the characters use, you'll see like Raya and Namari never have their feet like super close together. They're not like sticking their hip out. They're not like doing this kind of like thing. And a lot of that kind of body language that they have, being like super strong with their legs kind of apart and sometimes having their hand on their hip, like that kind of body language for me reads very true to Southeast Asian culture for a character that's like they are, a royal princess who's super strong, who's a warrior. Like those kinds of things were really, really nice for me to be able to see in the final picture. So anyway, so that's Raya, what it looks like. And when I first came onto the project, they actually asked me to help them plan a trip, a research trip. So, you know, I don't know whether it's well-known information, but I think it's really important information that the team took 2 trips, I think, Steve, right? I think they took 2 trips to Southeast Asia, and I was brought on for the second one, and I got to work with them on their time that was in Bali. And this was, again, one of those moments, and I wanted to share with you today some of the kind of like challenges that I've personally faced in this journey, because I feel like that's more realistic. And some of the moments when I felt kind of nervous. So when they asked me about planning this Bali trip, first of all, when Rika sent me the message, I was like, oh, this is spam. Like someone's hacked Rika's account. Like, why would Rika tell me something about Disney? But I texted her back, thank goodness. It wasn't spam. It was indeed her telling me about a Disney project. And so I spoke with Osnat about their trip to Bali. And I remember when I spoke to her, I was nervous because I knew that in order for me to be able to be part of this project, I would have to like give them the talk. And like my friends have what they call the Emiko talk, which is if people come to Bali or come to Indonesia with me or kind of under the umbrella of a project that I'm working on, there's this talk that everyone has to get and has to sign on for. And it involves like all the rules, which is really long. It's like a 30-40 minute talk. And I said to Osnat that, you know, like I would be honored to do that, but would it be okay for the group to, you know, like listen to the kind of protocols that I felt would be appropriate for the team? And she said, yeah, definitely let us hear what you have to say. So the first time I was in a meeting with them, I was in this Zoom call, and it's like this big table, and it was like the producer and the directors and the head of story, like the animators. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm on a call with all these like big Disney people, and I'm going to be really mean to them. But I basically, you know, gave them a set of rules. I mean, of course, I was polite. I don't think I was rude about it, but I said, you know, I would like to take you to a temple ceremony, but in order to do that, you'd have to dress this way. You would have to sit on the ground. You would not be able to see the actual like apex of the ceremony, probably because that's not necessarily public. You could see music and dance, but, you know, you might be uncomfortable, yet there might not be a chair. You might not have food for a while. And I was really very touched by how responsive and excited they were to hear that whole like laundry list of rules, and how when they came to Bali, they really, really, truly embraced it. We have them in pictures of them in pakaian adat, traditional Balinese wear, and I took them to this ceremony very, very large ceremony in our village. They studied gamelan in our home. They spoke to the head of our village. They spoke to our priests. They saw our sacred masks. They visited some of my most important teachers. And at one moment in the temple ceremony, there were two amazing moments. One, I saw this like big like pile of children in a corner. And I was like, uh-oh, what's happening over there? Like, I hope nothing's going wrong. And then I saw one of them run off with like a piece of paper. And then another one ran off with a piece of paper. And I realized that John Ripa, who is the artist who drew Moana and drew Raya, I imagine that animation people know. I didn't know who he was because I was very ignorant. I still am. But he is an amazing, like one of the best in the whole world animators. And he was just drawing sketches and giving them to kids like in the temple, and they were having a ball. And I'm sure the kids didn't know like what was going on, except they knew he was a great artist. But it was so beautiful to see him giving so generously to all of the kids in our temple ceremony. And there was another time when I was looking for them, and these guys are big. They're like 6 feet tall or 6'2", and they're very blonde, very blue eyes. And I mean, there were some Asians also on the team, but there were a couple of like big guys who wouldn't normally blend in. But I remember looking for them in the ceremony and I couldn't find them amongst a sea of Balinese people because they had integrated themselves so perfectly. They were like sitting on the ground. I mean, it wasn't particularly clean on the ground, and it was crowded and it was hot and there were like people all over the place. And they were just like right there being totally still for hours and hours and hours. And they had a camera with them, and I said, you know, I wanted to make sure that the cameraman wasn't doing anything crazy. So I had like his ear, and I could say to him across the temple, like, you need to sit down. And he'd be like, oh, and I'd see him like go like this, and he'd sit down. I'd be like, you need to move over to your left, because he didn't know where was appropriate for him to be. But because of all of that, we were able to have them in this ceremony. And it was, I think, our village community felt really wonderful that they were there. They were honored that this team had come, and the team was so very, very respectful the whole time. So then we came back to Los Angeles, and they did a gamelan workshop. We took our whole gamelan to the Burbank studios. We did a ketchup workshop with them in the Burbank studios. We did a dance demonstration where we talked about those things: levels, facial expression, nature of movement. We got to sit at the table, like that big table with the animators and the producers. I was like, I couldn't believe it when I walked in the room and I saw like the sketches and the storyboard. I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. It was truly incredible. It was very inspiring. And to think that like I was able to get into that room just by being like the person that I normally am was kind of like a big life lesson for me. Like that was kind of something I have to continue to remind myself of. We got to watch clips as they were going through the early stages of things. We'd look at things. We had a lot of conversations about skin tone and representation, which I was not the only one on our team. I think there were a number of people in our team, right, Steve, that were really wanted to make sure that skin tone was thought about, was addressed mindfully, that was worked into the story in a way that didn't follow kind of some easy to slip into typical characterizations. So if you go back and watch it, you'll notice that there are different regions in the story, but they are not different colors of skin. And the leaders are not like fairer skinned than the people who are not leaders. And there are 50% men and 50% women in each scene, and 50% darker skin, lighter skin, medium tone in all of the scenes. So those things were very important to a number of us, because we really do have some pretty serious issues with colorism in Southeast Asia. And we wanted to make sure that that didn't carry over into this really important film. I have a thing about story that I want to share, but I don't know if there are questions yet at this point, or comments or anything like that.
Hi, yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
Cool. First, thank you for letting me be on here. I'm no one important, but I saw this post on Twitter and I just wanted to join because I'm a big fan of Disney animation and also of Raya. As you can see, it might be I have a Commandra blanket hanging on my wall over there, and I have my
Commandra. I love that. We have the blanket.
So my question to you, because you did bring up something about, typical or stereotypical Asian characteristics. And One thing that I had read after the movie came out was Raya's hat was originally not going to be in the movie. However, I forget who it was that said that it should be in the movie because, it is an authentic part of Southeast Asian culture. So my question to you is, where do you find that balance between including features that may be stereotypical, but also wanting to be authentic? Like how do you find that balance between being stereotypical and authentic?
That's a really good question. And that was definitely something that we were all, I think, navigating together. And Steve, for sure, please jump in if you have information that you would like to share or something you want to share about your feelings on this. I would just say, I think that's complicated. And I think it's, it has to be addressed in every, like it was just like that. It was like the hat, the shoes, were they wearing shoes? Were they not wearing shoes? What kind of clothes were they wearing? Who was standing where? It was very detailed because certain things are symbolic. And I was in on that conversation. They brought that up to me too. And, in fact, I remember specifically now that you're bringing this up, we had that conversation about the hats. And just, I don't know, 6 months before that, my teachers who were rice farmers and amazing artists as well, who travel internationally, do crazy contemporary gamelan in Germany, plus they're also rice farmers. I had brought a group of people to study with them, and they handmade those kinds of hats. And they were so excited to give them to everybody. And they loved the hats and they wanted people to wear them in the rice field because it was going to be really hot. And so there was truly a sense of love and joy and pride in those hats. And so I feel like, the fact that those hats have been at times used to like in ridiculous. Now I've gone back and watched some of like the early cartoons that were on TV when I was a kid. I was like, I can't even believe I saw that without being like fully traumatized. But like there's some really very, very racist depictions of Asians where those hats play in with some crazy like music and like some weird linguistic patterns that are definitely racist. And I think it's a wonderful time to try to move past that, to really acknowledge that some of those things are meaningful. They have function and meaning and connection for people. And let's bring the conversation to something that's deeper than those crazy racist, simplistic depictions of Asians from the 70s, 60s. Steve, please.
Sure. So I'll just chime in. I know this is about Emiko, and I want to honor that
Steve,
space.
he's just being sarcastic.
No. She's. I mean, she's so humble, and we were truly blessed to have her. She played, a huge role. I can't like overstate that enough. About every meeting that I've gone to, like, did you ask Emiko? This is what Emiko said. So like this name would come over so often, and I was like, who is this person? And then we became friends after and all that. But Nick, to kind of get back to your question about how how we navigated this, like I would say that working on a Disney project with this global platform, I began to think about how people from the homeland would view a certain topics like the hat versus somebody who maybe was sort of informed by the West and all the stereotypes. But people from the homeland view that that feature, that hat or whatever it is, from a very different point of view. So we have this global platform on which we have to take more of a 360 point of view, where it says it might be a stereotypical kind of trope or meme here, but there they take great pride in it, and they viewed it as a sense of pride. Wow, you included that. It wasn't like, oh wow, that again. It was like, wow, great, that's in there. So we were getting these different perspectives, and I know Emiko is incredibly grounded, and in touch with the people there, on the ground in Bali, and I feel the same way with the people in mainland Southeast Asia. So we would probably get very different perspectives if we were to ask our friends here, who are informed about the West and all the stereotypes that we might face here as Asian Americans versus people who are nationals from their homeland. So, I think we got to take maybe a step back and look at the broader perspective that people from the same heritage could look at a motif very differently because of the places that they were raised.
So perfectly said, Steve. Thank you. I like the 360 perspective. That's a great way to think about it. Nick, does that kind of feel like it was what you were thinking about?
Yeah, thank you both for answering. That was a beautiful answers. And being a first generation Cambodian living in America, having never traveled to Asia, that was kind of, my feelings on it were, is that a racist depiction? But I think what Steve was saying, and how taking a global look at it and taking it from the perspective of the people actually living in those countries, I think that was it opened my eyes a lot more. So yes, that answer was perfect. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nick. I'm so glad that you could join us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Were there any other questions before I wanted to say something about story, but certainly could take a question or two if anyone has.
I also have another question. So, first of all, thank you for taking the time to come to our class and talk to us. I was writing, that gesture that they constantly do where they make an O with their hands and raise their head. So I know that this film probably takes inspiration from several different East Asian cultures, but as a Thai person, what it reminded me of was like the Y, which is a sign of respect, agree, like a thank you. So I was just wondering if you or Steve knew if there was maybe a specific culture that gesture was drawn from, or if it was maybe taken from several different cultures.
That's a great question. And I'm really glad to hear it because these conversations happened about these exact things, like what to do with the hands, what about the hat? And Steve, again, please do jump in. My understanding of that, and Steve, you might have been in different conversations, but was that they were inspired by the many gestures we have in Southeast Asia of ways that we show respect with the hands, with the body, but did not want it to be specific to one particular country, and did not want it to be so even specific to just Southeast Asia, but have it be kind of have a more global or have its own unique kind of language within Kumandra, within Raya itself. It's like it's its own universe, because it's not actually Southeast Asia, but it's its own world, and that this was a gesture that belonged in Kumandra and was part of Raya's story and part of Raya's culture. But it definitely inspired by Southeast Asia, but not exactly that. Steve, what did you understand from that?
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. First of all, sawadee krap to our Thai friends out there. So the Y in Thai or the Nok in in Lao is one of the places that we drew inspiration, but we drew many points of inspiration. If you look throughout Southeast Asia, you're going to see those clasped hands come together close to the heart and close to the head, across the region. And the reason why it was a circle is because it was in the shape of the gem itself, and that was the reasons why we wanted to keep it different, because we didn't see that type of kind of open handed symbol, and because the gem was so important in the land, that was one way to sort of differentiate but still be inspired from. And that's always kind of more art than science. So I'll keep it short. Emiko, this is your platform.
No, it's so great to hear you, Steve.
Much.
I love it. You're so super intelligent and eloquent and awesome. I'm just being nice to him now because we're in public, but later I'm going to be sarcastic to him. So thank you for that question. That's a really great question. And I wanted to say something about story, which, Steve and I were part of the Southeast Asian Story Trust. I believe that's what it's called, right, Steve? But I just want to share this thing that happened when I first told my family that I was being contacted to be a consultant for Disney. I was super excited. I was kind of flipping out that I was gonna be working in any capacity on a project that had the word Disney in it. I was like, what's even happening? So I was super excited. And I told my son, who at that time must have been like 16, and I said, Tode, I'm going to work on a Disney project. And he was like, Disney? I was like, yeah, like, he's like, you mean Disney? I was like, yeah. He's like, Mom, Disney is that company that makes all those films where the parents and the children get into an argument and then the child goes off and does something amazing and they come back a hero and their parent was wrong the whole time. And then the child is celebrated and the parent has to apologize. He's like, that's not our family. I was like, oh my God. I was just like flabbergasted. I was like, oh my God, like what, like, how did I miss that? And like, how is my 17-year-old son like telling me this? And it was so true. It was like all the stories from Disney, like really did have this very specific story pattern. And it was like, I was like, oh my gosh, that's very true. And like, if that's going to be how the story unfolds, like, how am I going to feel about that as a cultural consultant, as a story consultant? So then I had to like, again, this was like another moment. Like I had all these moments when I'm like, oh my God, Emiko, like if you tell them what you're really thinking, they're going to be like, okay, thanks, Emiko. Nice working with you. Bye-bye. And like, because I'm also a voice actor, I was like really cognizant of the fact that this was an important relationship for me personally and professionally. And yet I had at times this, the me part of me was like, well, but you're responsible for your children and your ancestors and your culture. Like you can't just let this stuff happen without saying something. So I did. I sat at that big table of people with all those directors and producers and said, my son said that your films don't respect the values of our family. And I thought for sure that was going to be the end of it. But I was amazed because they said, well, tell us about that. Like, what does that mean? In what way? And what would make it feel like it reflects your values? And so I don't want to give away the whole story, even though I think most people have probably seen it, but I did walk away really feeling very good about the story, about the core fundamental philosophy and story of Raya and the Last Dragon was something that to me, I was really happy to share with my children. I was proud to be part of it. And my children and I saw it together with Steve, by the way, in the theater. And it was like, it was the first time I had gone to a Disney film and felt like this was something I could really resonate with. It was a story that rang true for me and my values and my family's cultural experience and the things that I wanted my children to be learning about and to be carrying with them, in a story that I wanted to be told. So anyway, that was an interesting moment again, when I had to be like, it was very nerve-wracking to sometimes actually say what I was thinking, but all along the way, people were very responsive and very open to listening to perspectives that were very different from what they were already working with. So anyway, that's kind of the like little thing about story. I also wanted to share with you just a couple of things that I learned about animated film. And, because you are an advanced animation class, and some of you might already know this, and Steve is a filmmaker, so this might be obvious to some of you, but I was shocked at how many people were working on this project and the scope of the kinds of people working on the project, because I thought it was like animators, people drawing and then maybe using computers, but there were like amazing animators who were in charge of certain specific characters. And I would talk to them specifically about how a character was holding their arm, like what hand was the gem in, like where were they standing in the scene. So there were people who were looking at the blocking, people who were only working on lighting, people who were working on character, people who were working on hair, costume, wardrobe, story. And they were just like, so production managers, accounting, legal people, producers, executives, admin people, writers, of course, and consultants like Steve and myself. And it was really eye-opening to me. And I wanted to say this specifically to this amazing class of animation people, because it does seem like, and I just moved to Los Angeles and the studios are like all encompassing here in LA. And it does seem like Disney is like this thing, like that's this unattainable almost, like how do you even become part of that? But I met a lot of people on that project who were story artists, animation people, who were admin people, who were just from all different walks of life. All of them were extremely skilled, really, really, really good at what they were doing. But they were all very unique and brought something completely unique and different to the project. And that was a kind of a depth of understanding of the complexity of this kind of animated film that I really didn't have before. And I have to say, it just was amazing to watch Oznat, the producer, and the directors try to, to balance all of the different deadlines and all of the different story requirements, and then needing to go back and put things into production and all of that stuff. So it was quite astonishing to me how many people and the scope of people that were working on the project. So I was just stunned by that. So I just wanted you guys in animation to be like, of course. But for me, I was like, holy cow, that's amazing. I had a couple of just like general takeaways I wanted to talk about with you, but if there are questions at this point too, just want to pause for that if anybody has that.
Emiko, Laura had a question as to whether you were part of the early story making process.
I came into the project about a little more than 2 years before it was released. So a lot of the story was already developed. Like there was a gem, there was a dragon, there were these different countries within this within Kumandra. But that's an interesting question, because Scott Sakamoto, who was working on this, was one of our production managers and one of my very close liaisons. He's now at Netflix, but at this time I talked a lot with him, and he came to Bali. He told me, I don't know if this is true, he was trying to make me feel better or what, but Steve might know this too, that when they came to Southeast Asia, they took 2 trips to Southeast Asia, and I was working on the second one, that at that point, they had not completely committed to the storyline as we see it today. That there were still some fundamental questions about whether they were going to be able to make that work. And I think what I was told was that going to Southeast Asia and seeing people, like the way people actually work together and actually like live together and do these huge things together as a community, that it wasn't just a theory, because I think there was a theory of like community and like, things like that. But like, we don't really see it in this country, in the US, right? That's like, where do we see an example of people actually being able to live and work together to do something major? It's like, we're so divided and there's so many problems. I think that there was a little bit of concern about whether that could actually fly. But I think that going to Southeast Asia was very influential, and seeing, probably more than me or anybody saying anything, just witnessing the tremendous power of community and connection and history and depth of connection to language and culture and one another. I think that was very powerful, and I think it did shape what the final trajectory of the story was. I think when I came on, it was like there were 2 possible choices for how the story was going to go. So I'm glad that they went the direction that they went. Is that accurate? Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? Thoughts about the process of Raya specifically? I was just gonna talk a little bit more in general about what some of my personal takeaways were, but if anyone has questions about the process or the studio or anything like that. Okay, so I wanted to share this last little clip with you. And hopefully it will work. Okay, let's see. No Disney animated feature is complete without some Easter eggs.
What's that mean?
You know, those hidden references that clever animators hide throughout the movie.
Got it. Noted.
If you look closely, you may see something or someone you recognize from another film.
Come on, focus.
Look here. That's right. That's Hey Hey from Moana.
Looks like someone's trying to be clever.
Look over here. Does that lizard look familiar? His design and movement was inspired by Bruni, the fire salamander from Frozen 2.
Whoa.
I bet you didn't know Tong had a missing offspring.
A little what?
The folks at Disney Animation called him Tongler, and he even made it into the production baby section of the end credits.
Good one, huh?
So that's a little clip, and that's actually my voice in that little Easter egg thing, which is in the bonus material for Raya. And the reason I wanted to share it with you was not to show you like that it's a cool thing, even though I really am excited that I got to do that. But I wanted to share with you that prior to that happening, there were so many like challenges and disappointments. And I kind of wanted to end on that because I know that a lot of you are in school and are working on projects, and sometimes like what happens after school or what the professional trajectory is or what the path, right? I love the title of these talks is so beautiful. But like, what is our path? What's it going to be? And I'll just tell you that the path is like, for me in my life has been full of lots of surprises and a lot of disappointments, and a lot of things that didn't happen the way I wanted them to happen. And this is like a little example of how that happened, because when I first came onto the project, I was already a voice actor, but I was still primarily at that time just doing music and dance, teaching music, directing dance, teaching dance and directing dance and doing choreography. But I was also coming into the field of voice acting. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is kind of amazing. And, you know, there was never any audition that was sent to me for any, even like the smallest character, no auditions, because those only go to certain people. Also, I did ask about the loop group, right? The background voices. I was very excited because I got a call from Terry Douglas, who was doing the loop group for Raya. And I was like, oh my, what? I'm being called by a loop coordinator for Raya, right? I was so excited. We have like 30 seconds in the conversation. She goes, are you SAG? I was like, no. And she was like, this is not going to work. I was like, oh my God. I went from like here to like in like 2 seconds. And I was like, and then I went and researched SAG, which is so frustrating because of course, you know, SAG is, if you were born in a family of actors, right, then you could have joined the union when you were very young. And then you don't have to do like, there's a lot fewer hoops to go through. But if you're an adult, it's very challenging to join the union. And it's one of those things where privilege begets privilege, because if you happen to be in a group of people that have been well represented in the industry, then you're more likely to have people who have brought you on for projects or family who've brought you on for projects. If you're like Asian American or Asian, then maybe you didn't have that in your family. You didn't have that access. And as an adult, then you have to like climb this wall, which seems like completely insurmountable. I have actually since that time, because of that incredible disappointment, become eligible to join SAG, because at that moment I was like, I'm going to join SAG. But at that moment she was like, sorry. And the conversation basically came to a screeching halt. And then after that, I got an audition for one of the storybooks, because Kaliko Hurley, who I think has spoken with you and is an amazing human being, she was very kind and kept bringing my name up. They sent me an audition for the storybook, didn't get the job. I was like, at the same time, I'm still doing my consulting and like being like, when I'm in my consultant mode, just 100% focused on trying to do the best job I can do, like just maintain my integrity, be clear, don't be afraid. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, this is really like sad. And then this little thing, which is in the Easter egg sections, it's like their bonus material. Kaliko, I had done this interview, which Steve also is in those interviews in like the bonus material of Raya in Disney Plus. And I had met the director of these featurettes, all the bonus material, and he had interviewed us, and we had had a really nice connection in the interview. It was really great to talk to him. And the next week, Kaliko said, hey, what if we have Emiko voice this Easter eggs thing? And he was like, oh yeah, let's do that. And there was no audition, there was no phone call. It was just an email that said, hey, are you available to do this? Do you want to do it? And it just like, boom, there it was. But it had to go through these like crazy other processes and like lots of disappointment along the way. So I just wanted to share that with you, because I think, you know, when we're interested in this kind of field, it's a really challenging, very, very competitive field. There are a lot of super talented people who are in the field and who are working hard. And I think resilience and grit and tenacity are very underrated. I think the people who've survived through it are the people who have held on and just kept going, like disappointment after disappointment after disappointment, just like keep going, keep moving forward, and like maintain your personal integrity. Like you don't have to give up. Like I wouldn't have not told that story of Dode being like, Disney doesn't reflect our family values, or like me lecturing all the producers and directors of Disney, telling them how they need to sit and where they need to sit and not to touch things. Like those were all important things for me. So I do think it's possible to like keep our personal integrity and also to move forward with our professional goals. And I do think that it requires quite a bit of tenacity and grit, just like hold on to who you are. I think we need to value the unique contribution that we make. I was brought onto this project because I'm different from everybody else, because I was like that really weird, awkward kid in elementary school that everyone used to tease because no one knew where Indonesia was. Like that ended up being the thing that made me special enough to be brought onto this project. So those things I think that made us weird and awkward as kids are like our superpowers, really. And the disappointments that we face as we're kind of moving forward in a very challenging and competitive field are lessons for us. And I think, you know, what I try to do is the 1 day rule. Like I let myself sulk and have like feel bad and roll up into a ball on the TV and watch Netflix and eat ice cream for a day. And then like, I got to just get back on the horse and just keep moving forward. So anyway, that's one of the most important things I learned in the whole project, was that, you know, it's important to like keep our integrity, not to be afraid to say things. When we see something that's problematic, don't be afraid to ask the questions. And that, you know, who we are as unique human beings is really important, really valuable, and we should honor that and keep that part of us and not give it up. And also, don't give up. Just keep going. That's all I have to say.
That's awesome. Thank you. That's just so much great material, Emiko.
Thank you.
And Steve. Thank you guys. Class has some more questions. So you guys have some questions? I have another question myself if I want to usurp the time. I wanted to know why the dragons were designed so I know it's a kid-friendly movie, but all the characters in the whole movie seemed sort of complex and, you know, coming from reality. So I was wondering if there had been a conversation about the design of the dragons, and if that had gotten like contentious at all, because they ended up looking very cutesy, kind of like My Little Pony sort of. And I thought, you know, to me, the dragons stood out as being sort of different. So I wanted had anything to say about that.
I imagine that Steve will have something to say about that, because Steve knows actually more about dragons than I do. I will just say that, you know, my personal, well, first of all, nobody knows what a dragon actually looks like. So it's kind of like, what do dragons actually look like? What is their actual role in life? And I feel, at least in, you know, in Javanese gamelan, if you go to the gamelan room, which you should still do, I'm just gonna remind you of that, there's a naga, beautiful naga over the gong, and the theme of nagas and dragons is really important in Southeast Asia. And I think they're different from Chinese dragons. And again, Steve, I really welcome you to join this particular conversation. But, you know, I feel like nagas and dragons are very protective and loving spirits. And I know sometimes they're depicted as being like super like powerful and kind of like badass and kind of scary, which is amazing and powerful and beautiful. But I also feel like there are many times when I in Bali have felt very protected and taken care of by things that might seem like they should be scary, but they're very protective and very loving at the same time. And I feel like I do think there was a very careful decision made about casting, of course, because Awkwafina brings a very, very unique perspective to that. that particular character. And I actually really like what she brought to it. Initially, I was also like, this is funny. She's like a quirky dragon, not like a serious dragon, which was also an interesting kind of direction to take her. But I ended up really loving the way Awkwafina did it. And I think the question is like, what does a dragon really look like? And I think for me, those kinds of spirits are protective and loving and powerful all at the same time. And it's complicated to figure out what that might actually look like. Steve, I don't know if you're there. I know you're a dragon man.
Yeah, so yeah, I do have some perspectives on this, and without delving it too much further, I don't know how much time we have to get into this, but yeah, I mean, I was pretty heavily involved with the discussions of the way the dragons went, and I would say that the way the dragon looks now looks appreciably different from when the first version came out, and there was I would say some spirited conversations as to the different interpretations of a dragon. There was inspirations, and for me, as long as the different philosophies were adhered to, and the specific ones I would point to would be they would have to be water inspired, have cool palates, have elongated serpentine body form, which is much different than like the Game of Thrones dragons that you see that have really muscular profiles. And our dragons don't fly, although we found a creative way to get them in the air, which is dancing on raindrops. So we are there to anchor it in some of the philosophies. The way that gets manifested obviously is a degree of art that is a collaborative process. And in these types of processes, you don't get exactly, like, no one gets exactly their exact vision of what they think, like a singular vision. It gets thrown into, okay, well, what are the philosophies? Well, what is the artist's rendition? And it ultimately comes down to what the director wants. So that's a process I think everyone, I think should begin to, I guess, gravitate around, is that while we provide anchors and, they listen to many of the anchors, there is a process and there is sort of a final say. And, it does come down to that. So there it is, Emiko.
Thank you, Steve.
That's awesome. Thank you guys for answering that. Questions?
I have one more question. I may be asking this question because it's past 5 here on the East Coast and it's dinner time, but we all know that food is a very big, important part of a Southeast Asian culture. And it had a great depiction in Raya and the Last Dragon. So my question is, how much influence did your team have in how the movie depicted food and how food was as important to the overall story as it was?
I know I talked a lot about food. I know they had some really amazing food while they were traveling, and that was a big part of what we were experiencing. And, we talked a lot about, I think Fawn also had a real connection to food, Fawn Virat Sunton. But when I came onto the project, food was already a part of it, but for sure, that was something that I talked about. I think all of us must have talked about food, because it's like, you can't really have a film inspired by Southeast Asia without food. Like, that just would be completely jarring and inaccurate, and like, what's even the point? So there was a lot of conversation about food. And Steve, do you want to say something? I mean, it's
well, I mean, I don't know how intelligent it's going to be, but what do you want me to say?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think, did we tell them to do food, or did they already know food was a thing? I mean, I know
I think they already knew.
Yeah.
Yeah, because just one quick story. Half our time when we went to Laos was trying to find out where these people got lost to, because they would wander off, try to look for food, and like half my job there was just to find our like world-class visual development people, because we couldn't find them because they were busy looking, foraging for food. So yeah, just trying to keep them safe.
We actually talked a lot about offerings too, because there's that moment when Raya is making the offering and Sisu appears. You know, I talked with them a lot about offerings because food is also often used as an offering. So there are different kinds of food, right? The food like on the boat, that's just like amazing hot food. And then there's food that's very sacred and very special. And even if it doesn't taste great, it's the heart behind the food that's the most important thing. So yeah, I guess everybody knows about Southeast Asian food. But one thing I did like, also, I know that we also talked about on their trip a lot, was gifts. Like, I really like Sisu's obsession with gifts, because every time they go somewhere, she's like, what are we going to take me as a gift? Oh, we need to get a gift for her. Like, and then, you know, it's just like, I also felt so seen by that, because my poor kids, every time we're in the car, I'm like, oh no, we got to stop and get a thing. So things like that. I loved having the food and having the like panic about the gifts. All of those things just like seemed like they were conversations we had in our car all the time.
I know the whole process of ole ole.
Oh my gosh, it's a thing. Like, don't go to someone's house without
it has
a
a special term.
Yep, it does.
But you know, you were talking about food and how important it is in Southeast Asia. And I remember when I was a student at the Academy Sanitari Indonesia, we would stop at a warung to eat, and Pakdar was horrified. Because my American students are eating at this roadside warung, they're all going to get sick. I never got sick.
It's the best food.
Yeah.
Absolutely the best food.
But yeah, it was. But it was really funny because Pakdar was just like, oh, you ate there? Yeah.
Of course. Yeah.
And I like the idea that there was a lot of conversation about skin tone, because traveling down through Southeast Asia, you come across all these stores that are selling whitening cream.
Oh my gosh.
The idea that the fairer you are, the better you are.
Yeah.
You know, and I found that truly sad that all these women thought they had to have white skin in order to be beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know that in Indonesia, there are so many very beautiful women,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with all different skin tones.
Yeah. Skin tone is something that I even remember, like I was watching early versions of the film and they're like, oh, this still needs to go to lighting. And it went back to lighting and they would come back like a lighter skin tone. I was like, what just happened to her? She's like 2 shades lighter. Like, could we talk to your lighting department? So they actually went back to and like, you know, those of you guys who are animators, I was like, we need to figure out a way to light dark skin in animation that doesn't make the person a lighter tone of skin. So they did go back and work on that. Yeah, because that's important.
Really interesting detail. Think about
lighting and skin tone. It's not.
Yeah, it's really important in Southeast Asia that we not reinforce that.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, all over Asia, that we not reinforce the idea that the fairer you are quote better than everyone else.
It is alive and well today. I know because my daughter is very dark skinned. Ayu is very dark skinned, and my son is because he plays soccer. And my husband is also like, he's black, like he's Indonesian. He's like a black Indonesian. So they're like, oh, he's black, and I'm white. Like we're actually black and white Indonesians. So there's like my kids used to think I was white. I'm like, I'm not white. They're like, no, you are white. I'm like, no, but that's not what they mean. That's a different thing here in America than it is in Southeast Asia. So yeah, it's and people will still today in 2022 make comments about my daughter and like, oh, you're so beautiful. You're kind of dark skinned, but you know, like you're beautiful. I'm like, oh, can I kill you now or should I kill you later? Like, I just don't know. Like, how do I do this without getting arrested? It's a big deal. It's a problem.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. Okay. Laura, this is your class. So are there any more questions?
I think we have another question here.
Yeah, I have a question about like, did you ever like offer suggestions and then Disney just decided not to listen to it? Because I know with like Moana and the Pacific Story Brain Trust, we have another professor here at ACM, Erenigo Rosoni. He would tell us about, like he was on this brain trust and he would tell us that sometimes Disney would listen to the advice, but other times, they would not. So I just wanted the same thing happened with Raya.
I do think, I mean, what Steve was talking about with the dragon is a really good example of that kind of situation where there's like a compromise. And I learned a lot about a lot of things because there were a lot of things that they would be able to incorporate and a lot of things that they could not incorporate, or they did not. I'm not sure. And sometimes I didn't know exactly why, because it seemed like I was always under the impression that it's like directors and producers that make the final decisions, but I don't think that's like it's very complicated. There's a whole like very complex like organism behind the decision making. And so there were definitely times when I would suggest something, I would feel very respected and very listened to, but it wouldn't be able to happen. And that was, I mean, I think it's very much like life. I can't say in any relationship or working relationship I've ever had, any production I've ever been on, where I've been able to get exactly what I want ever. In live performance, in dance, in singing, in music, gamelan, anything. There's always like an element of compromise. And I think as a consultant, from one of the challenges is you need to provide your kind of most honest, thoughtful, insightful feedback and suggestions, and then choose which ones are really, really important, and then kind of like which ones you're going to kind of actually try to advocate for or push more. And skin tone was one of those things. And all of us, I think we're talking about skin tone, like for everybody across the board from different countries, people were worried about that or concerned about that. And so there were times when that could happen because there was a sufficient push for it. There were other times when it just didn't end up manifesting itself. And I mean, for me, I still feel like that is the nature of a complex production. You can't, in any very big production, no one person is going to be able to have all of their ideas and all of what they want to be in there. And I think, in a project like this or Moana, where it's inspired by people of Southeast Asia, for example, it's very important. I think the highest priority has to go to things that are going to be respectful and avoid things that will be offensive or disrespectful or racist or insensitive, right? I think those need to be the highest priority things in a production. But it's always a compromise, always a conversation.
That brought up another question for me, especially with what Patty said earlier about the varying skin tones and the types of women in Southeast Asia. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me was seeing the character of Namari. A lot of women in my family have very broad shoulders and they have buff arms. They're more muscular than I am. And I just really love that she was one of the first characters that Disney has ever showcased with that physical stature and body type. How much influence did you and the consulting team have on her character?
When I came on to the project, she was pretty well established. She was already drawn. But I had some really great conversations with the head animator that was working on Namari, and he was very careful. He would say like, oh, does this hand position make sense for her? Does this body stance make sense for her? Like, what would she do with her eyes? Like, would she have her eyes straight up? Would she have her eyes like downcast? Or like, what would she be looking at? What would her face be like? So those animators that were working on her were amazing. I mean, I got a lot of pictures from little kids in my life, and all of them had Namari in it. Like, all the girls were like, I love Namari. She's so awesome. Yeah. And I love that she's like got such a strong body. And like we did one of the dance demonstrations I did was about like character, like warrior stance and things like that. And I feel like, her wide stance and her broad shoulders and her arms are like always kind of like squared like this. And her gaze is very straight and her chin is like slightly lifted. All of those things, like as a dancer, you're like, yes, that's like her character. That's who she is. And it was amazing. I love that character. And I think a lot of people did. A lot of people loved her.
You know,
think
Emiko's
we're-
right. Body stance is important, especially if you're a dancer in Indonesia, because your body stance actually kind of signifies your character.
Mm-hmm. I'm almost always cast as some kind of warrior woman because I'm so tall, right? Go warrior women. That's why we're like, yeah, Raya.
I'm always Srikandi,
Kandi's awesome.
thanks to your dad.
It's gonna be the next Disney film.
I think
Laura,
we're about at the end of our time, but thank you so much, Emiko. This was really wonderful. And thank you, Patty, for setting it up.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for
Laura.
having me. I'm honored and so happy to be here with everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today.
and the next one that Asian Studies is working on now is Matt Dunn and being a game designer at Riot Games. And he is actually a former UHM band geek and performed with his Auntie Miko with the Javanese gamelan.
Matt.
So
Yay.
keep an eye open for that. And thank you very much, Laura. We'll sign off.
Thank you all, and thanks for joining, Steve.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much,
Emiko.
everybody. Thank you.
See you, Matt.